So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio.
Have a question during the show? Give us a call at 1-888-914-9149. There might be a couple of topics you might have a question on today. We're covering a lot in a little bit. My guest today will be our in-house matchmaker, Cristina Pineda. She's a co-founder of Matchmakers in the city who joins us regularly here on Trending. We're going to be talking about two things with her. One, does physical attraction really matter? And two, how can we strengthen marriages during challenging times, such as a quarantine where you're stuck together? We're seeing a lot of celebrity couples splitting up, including Kelly Clarkson, Megan Fox, and others. And I think there's a lot to be learned by these relationships and the challenges that we two face. Two topics relating to abortion that we have to discuss today. One, a video came out earlier today from the Center for Medical Progress. That's David Daleidon's organization. He's a gentleman who's gone in undercover exposing the selling of aborted baby parts and the harvesting of babies born alive, and often intentionally. I'll also talk about something that maybe you're questioning, and that is a Supreme Court decision that came out this week with regard to abortion in Louisiana. I have to say something here that I think is really important for us to remember. We need to stop playing politics on women's bodies. There are 7 things that you need to know about this Supreme Court decision on abortion and having to do with women, because it really does matter, and this is unacceptable and unconstitutional. First, though, I want to dive into this topic of the video showing on the witness stand, under oath, Planned Parenthood and their partners in the buying and selling of fetal body parts who have gone to the witness stand, and they've had to admit what's been going on. We're going to play portions of the video, and I'll be sure to post a link to the video at the end of the show as well. But this will really help you understand what you're seeing happening in these videos, because there's a lot of history. I mean, we've got more than 20 years of history about what's been happening behind the scenes with regard to the illegal buying and selling of babies' bodies. And this is something that women don't know is happening to their children. And also, women don't necessarily know that their babies are being born alive, either accidentally or intentionally, and the baby's body parts are being harvested while the baby's still alive, still, quote-unquote, intact. You may remember the Virginia Governor Ralph Northam saying this at the beginning of 2019.
If a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother.
Do you remember this being said by the Virginia governor last year? Where he says, sure, well, allow that baby to be born alive. Or maybe that baby will be born alive having to do with abortions. And if that's the case, even though the baby wasn't wanted, we'll make sure that baby's taken care of for a minute. But then we're going to have a conversation with the mom about what her options are. That is, whether or not she wants that baby to be killed alive. That's infanticide, and that's illegal in this nation, the United States of America, because we know better. Moms don't want this, and in fact, when they find that their child is born alive, often change their minds. Yet they're not being allowed that opportunity, as you'll see in the case laid out below. You may have followed the story of David Daleidon, who I believe back in 2015 it came out that he had conducted a 3-year undercover investigation into Planned Parenthood, the Abortion Federation of America, and other partners that they have, such as Advanced Bioscience Resources, which is a company that goes in and procures the baby body parts from Planned Parenthood. In fact, in some cases, Planned Parenthood doesn't really have to do anything in the sense that they perform the abortion, and then the procurement individuals come in and pick and choose and tear apart the baby's intact body at times to get what they want. Now, I have to apologize because this isn't an easy topic to discuss. I was watching this video while eating lunch and I had to stop. I had to pause multiple times in the middle of the video because it's so atrocious. But you and I have a responsibility, and I really do believe this, to bear witness to the life of that child, the ignorance of that mother. I think about the corporal works of mercy, and one of them is to bury the dead. And there's no burying of the dead that's occurring in these cases, but we can honor that life by telling the truth about what's happened. It's almost like we're attending a public funeral that's never happened, that we're just talking about hypothetically and going through the gruesome details of how this person's life has actually ended. This is exactly what's happening, and I do think this falls, in a sense, underneath those corporal works of mercy. So listen to this conversation in the video with one of the Planned Parenthood representatives who's talking about an intact baby with a heart.
Is the entire fetus intact in the lab when the procurement technician enters the lab?
Yes.
How does a tissue procurement occur in one of these situations when the entire fetus is intact in the lab?
We do dissection.
Do you mean that they did not have a heartbeat?
It would depend.
How long did PPPSW have a relationship with ABR, or does it continue to today?
It continues.
So those are two people on the witness stand during the David Daleiden trial, one from Planned Parenthood and one from Advanced Bioscience Resources. This is them testifying in 2019, years after the undercover expose of Planned Parenthood and Advanced Bioscience Resources. You'd think that they would have stopped engaging in the illegal activity of performing infanticide, that is, killing a baby that's already been born, of partial birth abortion, which was banned in 2007, where they changed the abortion procedure so that the baby comes out feet first, last thing to come out is the head, but not fully, and so they insert something such as the horrific sharp instrument of a scissor even to kill the baby before it's fully out of the womb, because that used to be illegal up until 2007. But here we're seeing that Planned Parenthood is admitting the altering of procedures is occurring and that a beating heart, a living human being, is being dissected by the Advanced Bioscience Resources. And this is a procurement manager here who's going to talk about what happens when babies are born alive, or quote unquote slip out, because maybe the mother's had a lot of children before.
So in a normal situation, you've said the surgeon certifies the completeness of the procedure, and then the technician goes and procures the tissue. And the technician then goes to procure the tissue. In a situation where the fetus falls out, does the same thing happen?
Certainly.
Okay. When the fetus falls out, is anything done to the fetus
No.
by the surgeon in your
No.
estimation? Is the entire fetus intact in the lab when the procurement technician enters the lab?
Yes.
Wow. So what was just admitted is Perrin Larton. She's the Advanced Bioscience Resources Procurement Manager. She just admitted that there are times where the baby slips out, so the abortion is not fully performed in utero. Therefore, the baby's born alive. Now, you have to understand that baby has legal protection here in the United States. It should be treated the same as you and I. Resuscitation, anything possible to save that baby's life. At that point, legally, that's when the baby and the mother both have legal status in the United States. But we're finding out that Planned Parenthood, in cooperation with Advanced Bioscience Resource, isn't doing anything. And so here's the question. If nothing's being done in this instance, what happens after the baby's alive and Advanced Bioscience Resource still has to basically make up a list and meet a quota of body parts that they need? Here's what's done to a living baby.
How does a tissue procurement occur in one of these situations when the entire fetus is intact in the lab?
We do dissection.
And just to be clear, you do dissection to obtain the tissues that are on the list for the day?
We do dissection to get the tissues that the researchers have requested, yeah.
They are, they have a heartbeat, don't they, at the point they would fall out?
Objection.
Of course, your attorney's objecting here to save you from digging a deeper hole for yourself because you've just admitted that you and others dissect a living human being apart. We've been hearing horror stories about what's been happening in China where living patients of COVID-19 are being left to die or even burnt alive. Whether you believe that or not, whether you think that's conspiracy theory or not, this is real here about babies who are literally being dissected and experimented on for scientific research to meet a quota because Advanced Bioscience Resources has various universities and research groups that wants that baby body part. A heart, a liver, a thymus, maybe even a brain. I know here in San Diego at UCSD, in fact, they're one of the places that procure or work with these procurement agencies so that they can have fetal baby body parts to experiment on. If you're a student at UCSD, maybe UCSF and some of the other universities, find out, is your school participating in this illegal activity? So the testimony goes on, and Perrin Lauren from Advanced Bioscience goes on to talk about how hearts are beating independently even when the body's maybe been maimed. Listen to this.
And by not alive, do you mean that they were not moving?
Correct.
And do you mean that they did not have a heartbeat?
It would depend.
Okay. And when you say it would depend, what do you mean?
I can see hearts that are not in an intact POC that are beating independently.
So she just admitted under oath that a baby's heart is beating as it's being operated on to receive body parts. Under the Federal Born Alive Infant Protection Act here in the United States, no matter the stage of development, if a baby is born alive and is outside of the mother's womb, it is to be protected and respected. It has equal rights as you and I do. Yet this isn't being followed. This is a violation of a legal protection here in the United States. In fact, David Daleiden, who released these videos from the Center of Medical Progress today, ended up saying that this is murder for hire because they know that they are killing these babies when they're born alive, and they're being hired to do so because they have to procure certain body parts of a baby. Don't be fooled when people say, hey, it's just a fetus. It's fetal tissue procurement. Okay, it's not just a byproduct of conception. It's not just extra tissue laying around. This is the baby's body who, in fact, usually when you go to the product of conception room at an abortion clinic, they usually put together the body parts of the baby to make sure that they got all of the parts of the baby out of the mother's womb, because if some is left behind, then she could become infected. Let's hear one more testimony on the stand from Dr. Deborah Nucatola from Planned Parenthood. She's the Senior Director of Medical Services for Planned Parenthood Federation of America. And they start talking about viability and when viability is determined. And if you don't know what viability is, that's when various states might say pass restrictions on abortion because they say, well, the baby's viable at 27 weeks or 22 weeks. That is, the baby could live outside of the womb. But as we know, in various states, they have different laws having to do with viability. And so when Dr. Deborah Nucatola from Planned Parenthood is being asked, she's asked here, viability is determined on what basis? Listen to this.
Is that true that you've had a patient deliver in the operating room a non-viable fetus?
I'm sure I have.
What do you mean by a non-viable fetus?
A fetus that's not capable of survival.
And how do you define that?
I don't define that. Viability is, well, I do define that sometimes.
Okay, so...
There's many criteria you can use to determine viability.
And what are those criteria?
Depends on where you work.
Okay, where you work. What are those criteria where you work?
Viability is determined on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, and what are the criteria you use to evaluate viability?
You can use different things. Estimated fetal weight, gestational age, the health of the fetus, the availability of interventions.
So when is viability? Well, she basically, by what she's saying, says it's up to me. It's a matter of what I determine. It's a matter of where you work and what you can get away with. It's a matter of even just saying, well, I don't have the adequate equipment in this room to care for the child. So here, go ahead, experiment on this baby. Harvest the baby's thymus, liver, or heart as the baby's heart is still beating in the child's body. This is what David Daleiden went in undercover and exposed to Planned Parenthood. Now, back in 2014-15, as this was happening, we saw a revolution where Planned Parenthood stopped having as many patients as they did. The public opinion of Planned Parenthood declined. But what's sad is that I feel like everyone's forgotten about this investigation. So we need to share, break down, and have conversations about these horrible testimonies coming from Planned Parenthood and their partners in crime. Because we're talking about the dismemberment of a child. And let me tell you this, these women, these mothers who often don't even want the abortion but feel like they have no other option, don't know that their children are being altered. The procedure's being altered, that the baby is being harvested for medical research. Many women aren't consenting to it, or when they are, they're not going about giving their consent properly because Planned Parenthood isn't properly working with them to get that consent. So I'm incredibly disappointed. This hits close to home. I grew up in the San Bernardino County here in Southern California, and the Planned Parenthood CEO of Orange and San Bernardino Planned Parenthood facilities, all of which I've been in front of, prayed in front of, admitted that there's no standard of care or even a protocol for babies who are born alive. This is happening in my backyard. What's happening in yours? And what is it going to take for you and I to speak up? This can't continue to go on. You're listening to Trending with Timmery. Thank you for joining us. Tough topics today, but we have to stop playing politics on the bodies of babies, children, and women. Because honestly, whether it's gender ideology or abortion, that's what's happening. And we need to stop buying the lie that this is necessary, that we need this to get ahead or to be happy, because that's simply not true. My guest today with me is Cristina Pineda, and I'm really looking forward to talking to her in just a moment here because she works with her company Matchmakers in the city. She's a celebrity matchmaker helping people to find true love and happiness, and so we'll be diving into that topic in just a moment. A message about our sponsors. Solidarity Health Share is simple to help pay for quality, affordable health care. They enable the community to share in each other's eligible medical expenses. You choose the doctors that you want to see. Even integrative and alternative medical treatments are eligible. Solidarity Health Share helps pay for NAPRO technology and costs associated with natural family planning. Solidarity Health Share is dedicated to both faith and your health care. Information is available at solidarityhealthshare.org. With me is Cristina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City, our new resident matchmaker here. Cristina, I have been following some of your work, and you keep asking this question, does physical attraction really matter? Let's unpack this. Let us know, what do you have to say on physical attraction, although fleeting actually does matter?
Yes. Thanks for having me, Timmery. It's a pleasure to be on. And physical attraction does really matter. I think that often people see it in two extremes, where it is the absolute die-all, need to have characteristic, or it's not important at all, and they prize other things above that. But we do need to see it in a more medium way, in the middle way, as we would say, where it's important, but it's one of the elements to a successful relationship. And we actually had a guest post on our Matchmakers in the City blog, who is my sister-in-law, Cristina Pineda, and she dove into how important physical attraction is, looking at it in the perspective of theology of the body, as well as Song of Songs, and how it talks about that physicality element of the lovers in Song of Songs. And her thesis in this blog is that it shouldn't be ignored when dating, that you need to feel that draw to the other person. So that's the short answer for, is it important?
It's interesting that you say that, because I do have a question here, and I imagine you see this often with your clients, because we've talked before about one of the things you do in matchmaking is you encourage them to start to open their eyes to the good qualities of the people who are already in their lives, essentially, and how sometimes they're a little more open to people they kind of put a big X over with regard to dating or a future spouse. But sometimes something happens, and that's this, where suddenly someone who you've known for years, you spent time with, all of a sudden becomes attractive to you and you don't know what to do about it. Can you talk about attraction within this slide as well?
Yes, I love that example, Timmery, because that happens. Attraction isn't just about physical attraction. There are many facets of attraction. There's physical, there's emotional, there's intellectual, and it's much deeper than if you just think that someone looks good. So for your example of the friend who the years have gone past and you've gotten to know more and more about them, and you've seen the world and you've seen who else is out there, and you start to notice some really, and you also get ready, you're more ready for marriage at that point. So you start to notice the qualities about them that would be a great potential future wife or future husband for you as you're discerning that, and you start to see them in a new light. And that's why there's actually another exercise that I do with our bachelors and bachelorettes, where I have them think about 5 people who they admire in their life, and then of the opposite sex, and then 5 internal qualities of why they admire that person for each. And then they start to figure out, and I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but it does open their eyes to those people in who have maybe those qualities have gone unseen, and they start to find that the physical attraction element has grown in with this other person.
Very interesting. I love how you emphasize that sometimes as you get to a point where you're maybe prepared or more interested in marriage than you were before, all of a sudden you notice the marriable elements of people who had kind of been on your no list that are a little more interesting. And again, I think that that's where people say, does attraction change? Or maybe it's just we start to look for different qualities. So tell me, how important is physical attraction?
Yeah, I think that's true, though sometimes we change, and I don't know if it's just things that open up in ourselves that we might be able to notice more about the other person. And so it's important, but some people take the physical attraction overboard, and they think of the whole Malcolm Gladwell, the blink effect. I don't know if you've read that book, but I'm sure the listeners have heard of that at least. And it's this idea that you basically need to want to sleep with the person in the first 60 seconds of meeting them. And that is wrong. You don't want to think of physical attraction like that. It's totally off base, and especially for women, because maybe for a guy, for guys that might be a little more common, but it's different for women.
I don't know. You can give us a call. Let us know if that was you, ladies. I'm curious here, but I don't think that's in general the first thing we go to as women. We'll be right back here on Trending with Timmery, taking your questions on topics of dating, matchmaking, relationships.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Our toll-free line is 1-877-914-9149 and is sponsored by Charity Mobile, the pro-life phone company. You're joining me today here on Trending with Matchmaker in the City co-founder Cristina Pineda. That's right, real-life in-house matchmaker here on Trending. And I've been taking your questions. Both you can give us a call and on my Instagram story. And a couple just came in on Instagram. Always feel free to comment during the show on my Instagram story. If you have a question during the show, you can find me at Timmery. Now, listen, this is the first one, Cristina. Can you recommend dating apps?
Ooh, yeah, this is a hard one for a personal matchmaker because I hear so many just negative stories when people come in about using the apps and using them for years and it not yielding the kind of success that they're looking for. So it's difficult. I've had some people, heard some stories of rare success stories from them, but it usually is when someone is very specific about how important faith is in their life, and also someone who knows how to present themselves really well on a platform like that. And we actually help people. If someone really wants to do that, we can help people in date coaching on how to present themselves. But it's difficult because there's just a lot of people in the fray, and it's hard to separate the good ones from the bad ones, and you can spend tons of time trolling through people who don't have the same intentions. You don't know what people's intentions are. You also don't know if they're catfishing you or if they're actually a real person, if they're looking for the same things you are, how serious about their faith they are, and you don't want to ask those questions before you've met, and then is it safe to meet because they haven't been background checked. There's a lot of issues that can go with them, but
I take it you background check all your clients.
Yes. Everyone is background checked, social media checked, and sex offender searched. We want to make sure it's safe. It's kind of like, with us, it's like we're a small village where, even though we have thousands of members, but we get to know everyone very personally and individually, and everyone's gone through those layers of checks. So whereas in a village, people would know the families of, this is his son or this is their daughter, and we know all about that person. But in cities, you don't have that. Right, word does get around, and now most young people and young professionals, and we work with all ages, but most singles live in cities. And you don't get that layer of protection when we're about to meet someone.
Cristina, another question that came in, and that is, how can you show your boyfriend, for example, affection without being clingy or immodest? Now, my producer here, typical guy, says food in one word. Now, we know food is the way to a man's heart, but what would you advise on showing affection without risking the relationship and your sexuality and even just your self-worth?
That is a great question, and I think the little things go a long way. We do work with a body language expert here who works with our members, and he says little things like a 3-second touch on the hand or touching his upper arm. If this is a question from a woman, touching his upper arm, and little things because you don't want to take it too far, and you definitely want to keep yourself. Boundaries are very important if you're doing a 3-second touch. Obviously, it's going to be somewhere, your arms, not anywhere else. And it's just important to make sure that the locations that you're in and you're spending time together are public places, restaurants, anywhere that you can. I know restaurants are slowly opening in most places, and public places are slowly beginning to be used more often now with the whole quarantine situation, but making sure you're not just going over to the person's house or apartment, even if there's someone else there. It's very difficult to be restrained and to not yield to temptation if you're in a private environment with someone. And that's what I think a lot of people have struggled with in dating with the quarantine.
And Cristina, also, I'd like your thoughts on this. Just a perspective I have is affection and romance don't have to be sexual. They don't have to be physical contact. I mean, things can be romantic by sitting and watching a sunset, going on a boat ride, sitting and having a conversation that is actually enlightening. I mean, there's a lot that can be very romantic, but then affectionate as well. My producer says food, like people have different love languages. And I love the book, The 5 Love Languages. I'm sure you work with your clients on this, but maybe the person you're dating's love language is quality time, and they receive affection by you being intentional and present, not distracted when you spend time together.
Yes, that is completely true, Timmerie. I'm so glad you brought up that book. We discuss that a lot here, and especially just being, if you want to be clear with a man or with a woman, say things, tell them. If you're not able to be physical until you're married, which is the way it should be, you want to make sure they know that you're really enjoying your time together, that you appreciate them. That's words of affirmation. The acts of service is another one where someone you can do something nice for the other person. This person who sent you the question is worried about going overboard. And especially as women, we have to remember that, because we're very much nurturers and givers. And if we like someone, if we like a man, we want to just do everything for him and cook and whatever else goes along with that. But you have to remember what stage your relationship is and make sure that your actions go with that stage of the relationship. So if you're dating, you can tell him these things and tell him that you're having a great time getting to know him, but you do want to let him pursue you. It's the man's job to lead and pursue.
So
it's the woman's job to be enthusiastic and show interest in what you say, but not be the one texting, calling, pursuing the relationship. You want him to be the one in charge and to feel like that. But he has to also know that you want him to do those things. Otherwise, he will stop doing those things. So it is a balance. It's a fine line. You do want to make sure, though, that you're not going overboard with the actions that you're doing for him just because you love him. And I tell some of our bachelorettes to, if you have that extra giver mentality, do some more volunteer work, text a friend.
Don't reduce
put that
it to
energy
your relationship.
elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. And I love that. And I think that's so important about our single life. Like, we should be giving ourselves. It's going to make us better people. It's also what we're called to do in life. We're going to feel better fulfilled and not be seeking satisfaction and romance and sexual intimacy all the time within those romantic relationships. Because even in marriage, that person can't be your everything. They shouldn't be what makes you feel good all the time. And in fact, we're going to talk about that, Cristina. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie. My guest today is from Matchmakers in the City, matchmaker Cristina Pineda. You can find them at matchmakersinthecity.com. Now, Cristina, we've been following the stories of very famous couples, attractive couples, in fact. We've been talking about physical attraction, who have been breaking up. For example, actress Megan Fox and her husband, who's the 90210 star Brian Austin Green. We also know about Kelly Clarkson and her husband, and even the Netflix couple Francesca and Harry from Too Hot to Handle. And these relationships are falling into shambles. And it makes us ask the question, what do you do when physical attraction fades?
Yes, and it might. That's part of a relationship. It's part of a marriage. It ebbs and flows. You're not going to have the same exact feelings for someone at all times. That's the same with our relationship with God. We're not going to feel the same things all the time. We might have a really intense spiritual moment with the Lord, or time with the Lord if we're on a retreat, or it may hit us throughout the day if we're at Eucharistic adoration. We're not going to experience that the same way, though, throughout the entire day. So we have to look at our relationships similar and know that just to know that it's it ebbs and flows, it goes in and out, but that doesn't mean that you need to get a divorce or you should break up. It means that it's a normal relationship. And if you've made a vow in marriage, like God has made a vow with us and our covenant with the Lord, He doesn't love us less if we're not as physically attractive one day or not. So I guess with the whole attraction fading thing, we have to remember that. And we can be very into each other, but at some moments, but intimacy and physical things are also a very difficult indicator, and I would say a bad indicator to know if this person is marriage material for you. So you want to do two things. You want to make sure that before you get married, that there's a lot more than just that physical bond. And I would think that with the whole Too Hot to Handle show, how it's all about bringing these extremely hot people together and seeing who connects.
A little too hot. I was looking at some of the images from this couple, and I'm like, oh, that is that's a little much for me here.
Yes, yeah, I wouldn't recommend this. I haven't seen the show. I wouldn't recommend it because of those images. But it does show, too, that there's so much more to a relationship, like your faith, your values, and depth that go into that. Also, the stability of the other person that go into choosing who the right person is. And then once you've made that choice, with the examples with the other two couples, it's so important for you to both be on the same page that divorce isn't on the table, that you're going to make this work, and you're going to find other people physically attractive. That's definite. It's not just because you marry someone, they're the only person in your life who you'll ever find attractive ever again.
Very good
That's
point.
never going to happen. And Dr. Popchak talks about that in one of his books called the Exceptional 7%. And he said there's always going to be someone more physically attractive, smarter, listed than your actual spouse. You're always going to be able to find that. You might meet someone like that, but it's important to know who you chose to marry and to know that God is going to bless that marriage. If you keep God at the center, He will show you depths of this person that you will never, and that relationship that you'll never be able to find in any other relationship. And one of them is if you're blessed with children, and that's just something that I've found now being pregnant has drawn me even closer to my husband. And even if you're not blessed with children, we're all called to be spiritual mothers and fathers of others. So being that giving couple together and knowing that we haven't missed the one just because we might not be intensely want to sleep with the person physically attracted every second of the day.
I'm just thinking, Cristina, spouses everywhere who have been married for more than 10 years, especially the women. What are you talking about? Of course there are more people attractive than my husband. I'm hearing the general response of women everywhere right now. And I think, though, it's an important point that, like, sometimes people can be like, oh, wow, that person's really good looking, but it's not like you're cheating on your spouse. You know, so fundamental to who we are. We were talking about this during our happy hour yesterday, is beauty. And there's this ideal of beauty that we have, and nothing can fully meet it, but we can acknowledge when that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Like, that's a good. And it's funny because it used to be, held that people used to call men beautiful as well. It's not something we do in our culture today, but beauty is ultimately what we're seeking. And so beauty in various forms can be incredibly attractive to us in the culture. One last question here for you, Cristina. I know that you and your husband have been facing the quarantine, and as we hear about all of these stories of spouses breaking up in difficult situations, what was the glue that you found has really strengthened actually your marriage during the quarantine?
Yeah, the funny thing was, before the quarantine, I was very focused on being cognizant and really prioritizing time apart from each other because I didn't want him to get sick of me. And this is I'm on my third year of marriage, so I've been doing that for a while now. And then now being pregnant. Well, yeah, I've thought that was very important to keep the relationship healthy and have our separate time. And it is
No, you're just
important.
keeping the chase alive, Christina. Let's be real.
Yeah, it's funny, but now being pregnant and not actually being able to leave the house as much, I've learned how much he cherishes me even when I'm not as put together as I would like to be. And it's that has bonded us, and we've got to spend a lot more quality time maybe baking together and doing things together and appreciating the downtime moments with each other and the more funny things. And it doesn't have to be as strict and scheduled as I had made it before. And it makes our bond even stronger that I now know this truth about our marriage. So I would encourage married couples to try that out and to allow the time and to be honest with each other. Not, I think with some of the divorces that we've seen lately in pop culture, it's people just keep things in a lot. They don't talk about when something's bothering them because they don't want to upset the other person or ruin the marriage. But it's better to be honest with, the way you said that hurt my feelings, or anything that upsets you. Obviously, you don't want to be picking fights at every instant, but if you have that open line of communication, which that has served my husband and I really well during this time of quarantine, and just also knowing that we've made that commitment to each other, and we do a check-in every month, and we also read a book together where we read portion of that every month together. So we're constantly building on our marriage.
It takes being intentional. It takes being willing to accept and show unconditional love in that time that's so important. That's been matchmaker Cristina Pineda here on Trending with Timmery. We'll be right back talking about the 7 things that you need to know about the United States Supreme Court decision that just came out on the Louisiana law that has to do with abortion. We'll be right back.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Boy, has it been a week with regard to the topic of abortion. I have to tell you, we started the beginning of the show with the shocking testimonial, or should I say forced testimonial, of Planned Parenthood workers and their partners, and how they participated in the selling of the aborted baby body parts. Now, people often criticize pro-life people, saying, you only care about the baby, you don't care about the mother. But I would radically disagree, especially in light of the United States Supreme Court decision that was handed down this week of Russo versus June Medical Services. This is despicable. It's a repeat of 2016 when the same exact thing happened in Whole Woman's Health versus Hellerstedt, that essentially would have closed down almost all of the abortion clinics in Texas. Not because anyone disagreed that abortion was wrong, but because the medical clinics themselves were not meeting basic medical standards to give women the proper care that they deserve. Now, of course, we would always say that abortion isn't adequate care for women and that abortion is not health care. But pretend for just a second that maybe we said, let's just talk about the medical standard. Let's not even talk about abortion, whether or not it's moral or immoral. Let's just talk about health standards. This is what you need to understand, because this is very important, and we need to stop playing politics on top of women's bodies, because this is what the Supreme Court case is doing. It's putting women at risk over the issue of abortion that is a political, moral, ethical issue. Yet it's women who are suffering. So here are 7 things you need to know. First, clinics would have closed in Texas in 2016 and before then, and now Louisiana, because they didn't meet basic health standards. In fact, I said it earlier, nearly all of Texas abortion clinics were scheduled to close until all of a sudden the courts agreed that they were going to hear the case that ended up being dealt out in 2016 that allowed for these abortion clinics to continue to stay opened. Second, basically, this is what's going on. We talk about health standards. These medical facilities were not willing to upgrade to hospital standards with regard to cleanliness. That's right. These medical facilities, abortion clinics, weren't willing to meet basic cleanliness standards. Third, these same abortion facilities were not even willing to make the appropriate room and modifications to their facilities for gurneys to fit through the door in the event that something goes wrong with a patient and the patient needs to be transferred, because the facility is not prepared to handle emergency situations with regard to abortions. So they're not meeting basic ambulatory standards for that patient to be properly and safely transported through the building on a gurney. What if something's happened, especially if her spine in any way has been impacted? I've known of women here at our local abortion clinic where the abdomen has been perforated all the way through back near the spine, and the woman died there in the abortion facility. I mean, I know of these stories. We don't hear about them often, where things go wrong with sharp instruments in areas where they shouldn't be, and they're not properly being cared for. And so, of course, a facility that's supposedly medical should meet these standards to get a gurney through the door to safely transport a patient. Fourth, admitting privileges for doctors at local hospitals were denied. Why? Well, often they're denied because they're not, basically hospitals don't want to work with abortionists. So what's happening is that many of these various facilities don't have privileges at a local hospital where, okay, something's going wrong, we're going to have a clean-cut process for processing the patient, hopefully before there's an emergency situation, to your hospital. Well, they don't have partnerships with local hospitals. And if I remember in the case of the Texas court case back in 2016 with Whole Woman's Health, they actually were asking for you to just be in partnership with one medical hospital within about a 30-mile radius. And these abortion clinics couldn't even make that relationship to provide adequate care. Fifth, they also are not giving proper treatment in crisis situations, meeting basic medical standards of equipment and so forth in their facility. 6, the only area that so-called healthcare, where basically so-called healthcare medical standards are not maintained. Why is it? This is important. Why is it that only with regard to abortion are medical healthcare standards not implemented, not required? The standard is not necessary. It only has to do with abortion because we have a double standard. This is a sacrament of our culture right now. And it's important to understand, number 7, we need to stop playing politics on women's bodies. Women deserve better than standards of health care, regardless of procedures. We'll be back next week, tomorrow, and every day after that here on Trending with Timmery.